Hi, this is Mary McFarlane and welcome to the BMA webinar on applications and CVs for higher specialty training. Okay, so the plan to go through for the next hour is just to work out what the timetables are for applications. So make sure everybody understands what's happening when, what your deadlines are and that kind of thing. We'll also go through how you can check eligibility. If you aren't on a core programme, we'll talk about the core competencies and how you can demonstrate that you have those core competencies if you're not on a core programme now or you haven't just finished a core programme. We'll talk through what comes up on the application form. Some of the specialties publish their scoring system for the application forms if they use shortlisting and others don't. So we've got a couple of examples of ones that do. To have a quick look at. Even if the specialty that you're in doesn't publish those, it is worth having a look at all the ones that are available because you will see that there are kind of some consistent areas where you can see exactly what it is that they're looking for. And then the second half of it, we'll be talking about the interview and what you can do to prepare for the interview themselves. And then finally, we'll be looking at where you can go for any further information. I still don't have anybody introducing themselves on the text system, so if you would like to do that, that would be really great. Okay then. So, St3 Recruitment. As the system has now been opened, I suspect most of you will know this, but there may be some people who are taking this sort of very early in advance and aren't thinking of applying to them till next year. Each specialty is run by a Royal College, a deanery or a national organisation. Each pathway has slightly different logistics, so unlike when you're applying for core training or core surgical training, it isn't really all as coordinated as that as when everybody was all together. But most of the applications have opened early Feb with a early March closing date. So I'm hoping that means that most of you at this stage will have actually registered and gone into the system to have a look at what actually is going on in the application form. So registration was available through Oriel or one of the alternative systems if you're not on one of the medical specialties that is being run through Oriel from the 19th of January. You have from the first or second week of February until early March to complete and submit your online application. So again, I'm expecting at this stage that most people who are planning to apply for this year will actually have been in and made that application so far. Not made the application, but certainly gone in, had a look at the sheet, had a look at what they need to fill in, what they need to upload, and just really understood the system. Again, if you're something like if you're eligible to apply for this year but not actually ready to apply for this year, it could still be a really, really useful thing to do to log in, even if you don't complete and submit an application, just to give yourself an idea of what's required and to help make yourself more ready for next year or the next round. So once the online application has been submitted, most of the specialties then only use a long listing, which means that everybody who is eligible will be invited for an interview at their preferred deanery or depending on first or second deaneries. But some places will use shortlisting, which means actually going through and scoring your application and deciding exactly what your achievements work out, ranking everybody, and then cascading people through their preferred deaneries. Once that's happened, then you'll be invited to interview or assessment from the 12th of March through to the 22nd of May. And then all offers will be made by the 23rd of May, and the latest deadline that you can hold an offer to before deciding to accept it or reject it is the 29th of May. I still don't have anybody logging in to let me know who they are on the text system at the moment. So if there's anybody that is listening to this and would like you to let me know that you're there, that would be really great. Partly because it would be really useful to know what specific questions you've got, that kind of thing. And to be honest, I'm not completely sure that without any interaction from the audience or any questions or discussion from you, I doubt this will actually reach a whole hour long. Okay, so today is the 18th of February. So I'm expecting that at this stage, if you're planning to apply this round, you will have registered on the system. You'll have looked at the application form and started filling it in. You'll have applied for, put in an application for MRCP Part 2, PACES, or If you are applying through a surgical route, you probably already hold your MRCS, or you may have made application to submit it in the immediate future. In other specialties, there will be similar qualifications you need to hold. In some cases, you need to actually have hold already and have completed those qualifications by the time you make the application. For most of the medical specialties, you need to have at least applied for and got a date to sit the MRCP Part 2 and the PACES applications, because you do need to hold those before you take up your role in August. So at this stage, you need to be in the system waiting a date, or have already sat it and waiting result, in order to be able to apply. And you need to already hold the MRCP Part 1. As I say, similar for other non-medical specialties. Some medical specialties also have other qualifications that they want you to hold, and I know that surgery requires you to already hold your full MRCS. So hopefully you know again what those are, and if you're planning to apply for this round, you've already met those criteria. And then the next thing that I'd expect you to be doing right now is talking to SPRs in your area, to understand the scoring system as well as possible, to understand what you can do to make your application as successful as possible. So to be talking to ST3s in the specialty that you want to apply for, possibly also ST3s in other specialties who will have hopefully some useful advice and guidance, though of course you really want to be talking to people in your specialty. But again, if there's people outside your specialty who are good at explaining what goes on in that kind of thing, it can still be useful to understand a bit more broadly what goes on in different specialties. Don't just stick to people from your own specialty. And hopefully you'll also be talking to consultants in those areas, particularly if you know any consultants who are actually involved in the selection and recruitment process. And then the other thing that I would hope you'd be doing at this stage is to have started collecting evidence for your portfolio. So thinking about what's the evidence that you need, what certificates do you need to print out, what feedback do you need to gather from your teaching, do you have your logbook up to date, do you have copies of all your work-based assessments, is there anything that you've done or taken part in that you don't actually have evidence for, and if so, do you need to contact anybody perhaps in your postgraduate medical education office, perhaps a consultant, perhaps somebody at a medical school, anybody that you need to contact to ask them if they can write a letter or confirm that you've taken part in something that you have done. You don't want anything to be missed out in terms of things that you could get for your portfolio, and if you need to ask people to produce documents for you confirming things that you've done, now is absolutely the time to be getting on with that. So the next thing to be thinking about then is, are you eligible for core medical training? Not for core medical training, for ST3 this year. And that means that, first of all, you've not previously relinquished or been removed from a training programme in this specialty. Hopefully most of you will meet that. That you're registered with the GMC and holding a full licence to practice. That you're eligible to work in the UK. That you've attained you have attained your MRCP, your MRCS by the relevant date, or whatever you need for your particular specialty, and that you have attained your Core 1 specialties, CT1 competencies rather, and that you will have attained your CT2 competencies by the time of starting. So that means that you've either completed a core medical training, or core surgical training programme. You are in the second year of your core training programme now and will be completing it soon. Or alternatively, if you are not on a core medical training programme, then you need to sort of think about how you're going to be able to demonstrate that you have achieved the core training competences. So the ways you can evidence core competences are, firstly, if you're currently on the core training programme, you might need to provide evidence of your successful completion of CT1, such as a copy of your ARCP from the end of your CT1 year. If you've completed completed, not completely, completed a core training programme already, then you can again give perhaps your ARCP from your CT2 years to demonstrate that you have completed your core training. If you haven't completed a UK core training programme, then what you will need is called the Certificate of Equivalence of Core Training. This used to be known as Certificate C, and it's also called the Alternative Certificate of Core Competences. So all of those different, it seems to go by all of those different names. And there are separate ones, obviously, for core medical training and a separate one for core surgical training. And for ACCS, if you've been on an ACCS programme and decided to move to a different specialty. So Certificate C, or the Certificate of Equivalence of Core Medical Training, or the Alternative Certificate of Core Competences, confirms that you've worked in a medical or surgical specialties for 24 months full-time equivalent, so it has to be 24 months, and confirms that you have met all other required competences. It must be signed off by a consultant who has worked with you and supervised you for 3 full months. They don't have to be 3 consecutive months. It could be somebody who's supervised you for 3 months in 3 separate periods, but they have to have worked with you for a full 3 months. If you have demonstrated different required competencies under different consultants, you can ask more than one consultant to sign it. So you can have a system where one consultant signs off some of the competencies, a different consultant signs off some of the other competencies, but each of those consultants needs to have worked with you for 3 months. So you can't have 3 different consultants who you've worked for a total of 3 months. You have to have worked for each of those consultants for 3 months. Once you've done that, you have to provide the electronic copy in your application and bring a hard copy with you to interview. Again, if this is something you need to do, hopefully you would have started doing it earlier than now. If you're planning on applying for ST3 training some later point in the future, this is something that you'd start wanting to think about now. So you can download a copy of Certificate C and have a look at it and start approaching consultants to check whether they will be happy to sign off and help you demonstrate that you've achieved those core competencies. Okay, so now we're actually going to look at the application form itself. So there are, I think it's 19 medical specialties that are all coordinated by the Royal College of Physicians. There are several other medical specialties that aren't coordinated by the RCP and are actually run by deaneries individually instead. But for the RCP publishes its full scoring system for the 19 specialties that it does run. I couldn't find an equivalent for anything that sort of broadly covered the surgical specialties. Some surgical specialties do publish them and some don't, so you can have a look at that. I would recommend having a look at the details of how these points are calculated, even for the ones that you aren't doing, if you can't find ones for the one that you are doing. Just because it's really useful to understand exactly what they mean by the different things and to make sure that you're getting the full level of points. This is an example from applying for core or core medical or core surgical rather than for ST3. But, for example, it is incredibly important to know that one full audit cycle is going to get you the maximum number of points rather than involvement in other audit cycles where you didn't actually complete the audit cycle. Similarly, to know that one publication at a international conference or an international journal is going to get you more points than several publications at a lower level, say at a national conference or in a national journal. So really take care of these things and have a look at them. So there's a maximum of 10 points for additional undergraduate degrees and qualifications, so make sure all of those are available. A maximum of 10 points for additional postgraduate degrees and qualifications. Additional achievements, max 10 points. The MRCP UK, again, if you have, you're required to have the MRCP Part 1, so there are no points available for that. If you already have the MRCP Part 2, you'll get another 4 points. If you already have PACES, you'll get 14 points. You can obviously list training courses that you've attended. They may help you demonstrate commitment to the specialty. They may help demonstrate a strong interest in teaching or something like that. But again, there aren't specific points for those training courses. And then next, there are no points available for achievements outside medicine, but again, you might want to use those to demonstrate particular qualities, leadership skills or communication skills. Then there are 6 points available for presentations and posters, 8 points for publications, 10 points for teaching experience, 10 points for clinical audit and quality improvement. And finally, they want to know about your commitment to specialty, which again is not going to give you a full number of points, but it will certainly give the interviewers an idea of what areas to discuss with you in your interview. And they will certainly be taking that into a point when they score you in your interviews. So for any of those things that don't actually have points involved in the application form, it's still incredibly important to include relevant and important things, because that will then form the basis of the things that the interviewers want to talk to you about. Okay, and these are some of the best guides I found to the surgical scoring systems. So there's an excellent article in the moment that was published in the BMJ a week and a bit ago. I think it was something like the beginning of last week. How to succeed in ST3 general surgery national recruitment. And it's pretty hardcore. It goes into great detail about what the scoring systems are in surgery, exactly how you can make sure you get the full marks in that. Cardiothoracic surgery, which is coordinated by Wessex Deanery, also gives you the scoring matrix that they use. If you're applying for a different surgical specialty, I would strongly recommend having a look at those, because even if they are not identical to the one that you're doing, it will really, really help you understand where you can pick up points, what kind of and what sorts of things you need to be working on and you really need to be thinking about in order to get the maximum number of points. We will send out these slides to anybody who's involved in anybody who's signed into the webinar afterwards, so you don't need to worry about writing down these addresses straight away. However, you can also just search how to succeed in ST3 general surgery national recruitment BMJ, and that should bring that up straight away for you. Now, as far as I'm aware, you don't actually need a CV for your application. For most of the applications. There may be, if I apologise if that's not true for everything, but I think that's true for most of them. The CV tends to come into place if you do use one in this application system as something that you use at the front of your portfolio in order to draw attention to the specific things in your portfolio that you want to make sure they don't get missed. When it comes to preparing a portfolio, when it comes to preparing a CV, rather, what you want to think about is how quickly and efficiently you can communicate the key data. So as a general rule, the most important things that you want at the top of a CV, the most important things should be at the top of your CV. In effect, the first half of your CV, so the very top of the first page, the first half of the front page, that's not necessarily half your CV, should act almost as a contents page to what else is available in your CV. So giving, really drawing attention to what those key things are. So perhaps your particular experience in surgery or in the particular surgical specialty that you're interested in. Any publications, teaching experience, any of those kinds of things that are really a little bit out of the ordinary, clinical fellowships you might have done, those kinds of things, the things that are going to help you stand out. So that the rest of your CV will be about checking the details, understanding what the background is to those things, maybe looking at long lists of other publications you've had, but making sure you use that initial first top of your CV to really make sure that the things that you want them to know about, the things that are going to help you make you stand out and make you different and really demonstrate what your strengths are there and very, very clear to see. Okay, some of the things that will happen at the interview. So these are some of the different types of stations that will be used at the interviews. They are similar to the ones that are used at core medical and core surgical training, so you will have come across some of them before. But again, now they're happening at a higher level. Again, you're going to need more preparation. They will be expecting a greater level of detail and a greater level of knowledge from you. A competency-based interview is an interview that focuses around the idea that your behaviour in the past is the best guide to your behaviour in the future. So a competency-based interview is typically one that is focused around, can you give us an example of a time that you have demonstrated communication skills, or perhaps when communication skills have made a difference to patient care, an example of a time that you have taken feedback on board and improved from it, those kinds of things where they're asking for very specific examples of things that you've done and they're looking for the detail. You will certainly have a portfolio-based interview, so an opportunity for the examiners to actually look at the evidence that you've brought with you. Pardon me. to look at the evidence that you've brought with you, and to check that all of the claims that you've made in your application are validated and are true. You may very well have a station that where you're given a scenario to think about. Now, the one thing with scenario interviews to remember is that it is very, very usually the case that they will, if you're given that in advance to spend some time with, you'll have perhaps sort of 5-10 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer, to think about that scenario. Perhaps you'll have to prioritise different patients and think about which ones are going to be the ones that you're going to focus on in the next whatever period of time you've been given. Perhaps you'll be given, in a medical specialty, you might be given a prescribing exercise or something to work out, but you'll be given some time to prepare that. When you go in to prepare to give your answer, scenario interviews always involve introducing a bit more information. So you might be given some new test results, or some new data, some new statistics, whatever it happens to be, but some new information about this, because what they're looking for is both how well do you react to this when you've got some time on your hands and you've actually got the ability to think about it through it slowly and logically, and how do you react when you're given data immediately? What are you looking for? What are the patterns that you're looking for? Again, the more information you have about the type of scenarios and the understanding of what it is that they're looking for in advance, the more useful that is. So do talk to the current ST3s and ST4s who've done this most recently. One of the things you want to know, for example, is what level of some of these scenarios will be designed to put you under pressure so that you have to make prioritisation decisions. Perhaps if you've got 10 cases to look at, you can actually only look at 3 or 4 in the time available. So you need some way of being able to triage those and decide which you're going to prioritise. Generally speaking, the assessors in these interviews do want to give you the benefit of the doubt. They want to get as much information from you as possible. So they will try and push you in the right direction. They will ask probing questions. They will look for the positive information and if it's there. So try and pay attention to the questions that they're asking you. Look out for the types of information that they're giving you, or the types of the directions that they seem to want you to go in. The more information you can give prepared about what you're thinking about, how you're prioritising, what types of treatment you might be looking for, the easier it is for them to then take you into the directions of perhaps the more complex stuff that's going to get you more points. You may also be asked to do a role play. Again, this differs from a scenario that you'll, rather than simply speaking to assessors, you'll have somebody who is actually playing the part of a patient. Pardon me. One of the key things to remember with something like a role play is to understand what it is that you're being tested on. In some situations, you'll be being tested on medical or surgical knowledge. In other situations, you'll be being tested on your communication skills. In some situations, you'll be being tested on both. But what's really clear and what's really important is that you need to know which it is in this situation. There is no point coming up with an amazing Dr. House-style, incredibly obscure diagnosis if it's actually a communication session and you've forgotten to look at the patient whilst you're explaining this, or whatever it is that you're doing. So make sure you understand going into a role play exactly what you're being assessed on and exactly what sort of information. Is this about decision-making skill? Is it about prescribing? Is it about communication skills? Is it about demonstrating medical knowledge? What is it that you're being tested on here? In some situations, you'll have a written test or exam. Again, try and find out as much as possible about how much you're expected to achieve in this time. Is it something where you are likely to run out of time and you're going to have to prioritise very clearly? Is it something where you're expected to complete every question? Those are, again, the kinds of questions that you really want to understand well in advance so that you know how much time to be able to put into things. Academic stations typically involve you being given an abstract or an article and perhaps a period of time to look at it and then be able to explain or discuss it. This is quite common in the surgical specialties, as far as I understand, where there's the academic. They're very keen on the academic stations, though some of the medical stations do use them as well. If you're not familiar with academic work and you aren't regularly reading articles and abstracts, and you perhaps aren't familiar with the kinds of statistical techniques that they're using or what you want to be looking for in an abstract, that's something you really need to practice in advance. Again, in the BMJ article that I referenced recently, there were lots of tips on how to bring yourself up to speed on academic stations and really make sure that you're going to be able to demonstrate absolutely tip-top skills when it comes to understanding academic papers and abstracts and being able to discuss them with somebody. And then the last kind of station that you might meet is a presentation, and the assessment centres use both advanced prepared presentations where you're asked to go in ready to present on a topic, and also ones where you are given a topic to speak about on the day. We're actually running a webinar in 2 weeks on presentation skills, so if you feel that's something you're not completely confident about, you're not completely confident of your ability to communicate effectively in a presentation, to make sure that you have a clear message and that you have a very definite style of presenting and you understand exactly what you want to communicate and how to do that best of all, then I highly recommend our webinar in 2 weeks. If you are running a presentation, one of the things that it's very easy to get wrong in a presentation, particularly in these very short periods, it is incredibly common for people who are doing presentations to underestimate or overestimate rather how much material they have for the time available. So you want to be very, very careful if you have a 5-minute presentation and 5 minutes for conversations that you get the full amount of points by making sure your presentation is 5 minutes long and there is 5 minutes for questions and discussion. It's very easy, particularly in a short presentation like sort of 3 or 5 minutes or something like that, to go over time or to not finish what you need to say. So that is something that you really can practice and think about in advance and build into your presentation the flexibility to be able to go into more or less detail whilst you're keeping a close eye on the time. Okay. Other things that you can prepare for an interview. Most interviews, particularly the ones, and it might be your portfolio station or it might be a special station designed to look at your commitment to specialty, will start with some kind of variation of who are you, why are you here. In some specialties, they actually use the presentation for this. Many interviews start with some variation on this question. It might come in the form of, so why have you applied for this job? It might tell us a bit about, can you tell us why you're here today? It might be in the form of, can you tell us a bit about your CV, or can you tell us a bit more about your experiences in core surgical training? Lots and lots of different ways of putting it. But this question is your opportunity to take control of the next 10 minutes and to make sure, again, like that very first page on the top half of your CV, to make sure you're drawing attention to the key information, the stuff that you've really prioritised as this is why I'm here, this is why I'm right for this specialty, this is what I want you to know about me. So, it's an opportunity to introduce yourself, it's an opportunity to demonstrate your motivation, and it's an opportunity to highlight the key skills and experience that would make you right for this job. So the questions you want to be answering are, who are you and what have you been doing? I'm Fred Bloggs and I'm currently finishing my 2nd year in surgical training in the Mersey Deanery. At the moment I'm in a cardiovascular rotation. Whatever it is that you're doing at the moment. The next thing you want to do is demonstrate your motivation. So that might be about sort of telling you what rotations you've done, what procedures you've observed that have helped push you in the direction of this specialty. It might be telling you about the key skills and experience that make you right for this job. It might be telling them about the moment when you decided that this was the right specialty for you. It might be telling you about the extra work you've been doing, the extra procedures you've been observing in order to demonstrate that this is the area that you're interested in. And again, that's something that you can practice in advance. It's something you can go in feeling very confident about, and like however this question is going to phrased, it's not going to faze you. You know where you're going to go with that. It doesn't want to be too long. Again, in a 10 or 15 minute station, you certainly don't have time for a sort of full 5 minutes. Let me tell you absolutely everything I want you to know. It's simply to highlight the top 2 or 3 things that you really want them to know about you and you want them to ask you about in more detail. I strongly recommend practicing this on your friends or a colleague or something like that if you can persuade somebody to sit still. If you can't manage to persuade a friend to sit still, practice it on the cat, practice it on a teddy bear, but do practice it. Even saying it out loud to an inanimate object, not that I'm calling your cats or your teddy bears inanimate, of course, it can actually just help you think, what is it that I need to do? What is the clear information that I want to get across about me? What are the 3 things that I want you to know? And that can be really, really helpful and send you in there with a strong sense of confidence and knowing where you're going. It can get you through that first couple of minutes when you're feeling very awkward going into that session, and just really help you get off to a good start, know what you're doing. So you'll be taking along probably a CV and portfolio to your specialty training interviews. Typically it'll be a lever arch file, plastic folders and dividers. Those of you who've completed core medical or core surgical training will actually be familiar with this. You've done it before. If you're applying from outside the UK system and you haven't done something like this similar before, then it is not simply a case of downloading or printing out your entire e-portfolio or anything like that. It should be a matter of selection, thinking very carefully about what the key information that you need to include is. And thinking very, very carefully about how you organise it to make sure it's absolutely clear and that, again, the assessors see the information that you want them to see and can find the follow-up information, the detailed information, whatever it is that they're looking for. So as a recommendation, this is where your CV can come in handy. You can actually use it as a contents page to summarise activities and achievements and provide evidence for them. You can also, as well as using the CV, in front of any particular piece of evidence, you could also use a summary page to explain what your role in that. So, for example, if you've taken part in a piece of research, perhaps as a team of 4 others, if you simply present that you say you've been in a piece of research and you presented at a conference, you might have the poster that you presented at that conference. You might have a letter from the conference saying, yes, we're very pleased to accept your poster, and you might have a certificate proving that you attended the conference. That doesn't tell me much about what your role in the research was. So it would be very useful also to have a summary page saying 4 people were involved in this. I was responsible for the literature review. Somebody else collected the data, but we did have this challenge with the data collection that we all worked on together, and we solved how we were going to collect that and still maintain anonymity. We all got back together after the data had been collected and discussed how we were going to analyse it. I was the one that carried out the analysis, and then we all worked together on the discussion. I was also the one that found the conference to apply to. So in that case, it sounds like you've been very, very involved. That might not be the case, but make sure it's absolutely clear what your involvement in the different activities was that you did as a team. So make sure it's clear that you weren't just the person of this group that carried out an audit or of a research project. You weren't just the person sitting in the corner and agreeing with everybody. Make sure you really make it clear what your role was, that you were active, that you were busy, that you made a substantial and important contribution, and what wouldn't have happened without you. So you can use both the CV and summary pages throughout it to settle that. And then make sure that you know your portfolio inside out and upside down. I did like this suggestion of actually knowing it literally upside down, particularly if you were sitting on the opposite side of a table from an assessor who is flicking through and saying, right, I'm sorry, I'm looking for evidence of this conference that you attended. Where's the certificate? You want to be able to say red divider, 3rd thing behind it, not forward a bit, backward a bit. Oh, it's there somewhere. I know it is. So really, really make sure you know that inside out. Make sure it's very clear. If you are using a CV or something like that as a contents page, that's never to be used instead of the official marker. Quite a few specialties actually give you a cover sheet that you have to use and want you to tick off everything that you've included. If you do use a contents page CV, then make sure that's in addition to that if not. On the other hand, if you're in a specialty that doesn't give you a tick sheet about exactly what they want to see in it, then that's something that you can actually create for yourself so that, again, it's really, really clear what's in there. It's colour-coded, it's easy to find, it's in plastic folders so people can turn the pages very quickly. It's just all beautifully, tidily organised and very, very easy to see your way around. The easier it is for somebody to find their way around it, the more time they will spend actually looking at your achievements and understanding what you've done well, rather than being frustrated because they can't find what they're looking for. So what might go into your portfolio to demonstrate your commitment to the specialty? It might be qualifications and courses. It might be evidence of seeking out extra opportunities to learn or observe, extra courses you've been on, extra procedures you've been able to observe, extra time you've spent on the wards, cases you've presented to colleagues, those kinds of things. It might be research, it might be teaching opportunities. One of the other key things to do about ready for the interviews is to practice talking about these things. And again, I would recommend see if you can get the cat or your teddy bear to sit still and listen to these kinds of things. Make sure again that your role and the outcomes are crystal clear. What quite often happens in these kinds of things is that people talk about, we did this, we did that, we did so and so. Again, it's not clear what your unique contribution was. The other thing that I found very interesting in an interview I observed recently was somebody was so into the mindset of I must talk about this positively that they almost missed out on what the assessors were looking for, which was evidence of where things hadn't gone perfectly, but they'd learnt from that experience. So, for example, if you have provided evidence of substantial experience of teaching, quite likely that the assessors will look for evidence of feedback that you received during teaching, and they're looking for evidence of how you've used that feedback to improve. If you answer that question with what kind of feedback did you get with, oh, I always got great feedback, brilliant feedback, me, that's not necessarily a positive. So think about how do you talk about those times where you've actually had a problem, had a setback, and you've reflected on it and been able to improve. Being able to reflect, being able to show insight into your abilities and the ability to improve is very, very important. So do think about where you're showing that as well as how you're showing how great you are. I've just got a few mnemonics now for you to think about for a couple of the stations at interviews. So, for example, this is the Starmonomic, which several of you may have come across before. It's one that's widely used outside medicine, and it's for about describing a situation that you've been involved in, or particularly for giving an example of a personal skill or that kind of thing. So if somebody says to you, can you tell me about a time that communication skills made a significant difference to patient care? A bad answer is, well, when I was on the urology ward, we communicated all the time. That team was really good for communication. It's not telling me very much about you as a doctor. What we're looking for is specific examples. So the situation was we had a patient who came onto the urology ward with X, Y, and Z. Then we want the task. What were you trying to achieve? And again, that shouldn't be a generic thing of, well, we were trying to make the patient better. It should be something quite specific. I was trying to explain the diagnosis to the patient. The bulk of your answer should be what actions you took. How did you know you were being successful? This is how I explained it. This is how I broke it down. These were the tests that I asked for. Whatever it was that you were doing and explaining what your thinking was in this situation. What I find quite often happens with medics in this situation is it's almost the reverse of if you were doing a handover. If you're doing a handover or something like that, you might spend quite a lot of time on the situation and the task and giving the patient history and sort of what's gone on for the past 24 hours. The actions might be very brief. So I've ordered X, Y, Z, 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 and this is what we're hoping is going to happen to next. This is what I want you to keep an eye on. That needs to be reversed when you're talking about this for the purposes of giving an interview answer. Situation wants to be briefly defined. Task wants to be briefly designed. The action, what you actually did in that situation, wants to be quite detailed. And then finally, you want to give us the result. And again, that should be about reflecting on your actions, either telling us why this was successful and what you learnt from it from this successful outcome that you took forward, or if it wasn't so successful, what was your reflection? How did you improve your medical care in the future? And this is another mnemonic for if you're asked to go through a scenario, what should you do in this situation? Or here are some patients, how are you going to do? Spies. Again, start off by seeking info, clarifying the problem. If you're given something general, what might you need to do? Are there more tests you need to order? Are there questions you need to ask to understand what's going on? If it's a situation where there's a patient safety aspect, assess this as a priority. If it's a situation where there isn't necessarily a patient safety aspect, make it clear that you've assessed and realised that. Don't just mentally do that. Sort of say, patient safety would be my next priority, but it looks like in this situation, I don't see a problem, blah, blah, blah. Next question is initiative. What can you do yourself? If you need to escalate it, should you involve other colleagues and who would they be? And in what order would you do that? And then if you have had to involve other colleagues, how can you support them? What can you make sure is available, is important, is ready for when they come along? So that Starmonomic and the Spies-monomic are just useful ways to make sure that you provide all the relevant information, that you think through all the important things when you're given those kinds of questions. Star 1, again, is for competency-based questions. Can you tell us about an example of a time when blah, 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 blah. The Spies 1 is for a scenario. Here is the situation. This is what you've got to do. How are you going to approach this problem? Okay, sorry, I seem to have got a slide doubled there. When you're going into your interview, I know this kind of stuff is simple, but it's amazing, A, how much more confident it can make you feel, and B, that it can have an impact on how you're thinking. Most of the time, you're not actually being judged on body language. If you're doing something like a role play, then they will be looking at your body language, perhaps in demonstrating how you're listening to a patient, or if you're dealing with a difficult situation or a patient who is agitated or upset, how you're setting boundaries with them. In those situations, the assessors will actually probably be looking at your body language and actually using it as part of their mark and part of how they're assessing you. In other situations, it's much less about you being marked on that. Generally speaking, the assessors won't care if you look nervous when you're speaking as long as you're giving the right answers. But it can have quite a big mental effect on you. So smile, make good eye contact with people. If you be prepared to shake hands. If you're somebody who doesn't shake hands a lot in your regular life, which is quite usual for a lot of us, I think, then again, that's something that can be worth practicing. Maybe sometime when you're in a cafe or a pub with a bunch of friends, just get everybody, just sit up and say, look, I've got an interview coming up next week, and I'd actually like to go around and shake hands with you all. Can we just do that? I know it's a bit silly, you'll feel daft, but again, better to feel daft in that kind of situation than in a situation where you've just shaken hands with a slightly overbearing assessor and you're thinking, oh gosh, did I mess that up? Again, it's just a really good thing for your confidence to get you over that initial moment of like, what am I doing here? Stay relaxed, especially if you're pausing to think. And you probably will find that you're pausing to think because these are tough interviews. They're designed to separate the very, very best from the really very good. So you probably will find the assessors are pushing you. They're trying to push you to the point where you're thinking new things. Perhaps you're coming across new ideas. You're having to really push yourself. If you find that you're being asked the same question for the third time and your mind is still going blank, trying to keep yourself relaxed rather than going, oh my goodness, it's getting harder and harder to, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Getting more and more tense does actually freeze your brain up sometimes. Staying relaxed and thinking, okay, breathe in, breathe out, shoulders down, actually can help unfreeze your brain and actually help your thinking process. There's kind of a sort of feedback thing there of reminding yourself to look relaxed can actually help you stay relaxed, can actually help you keep thinking. So if you're pausing to think, if there is a silence, that's okay. It's okay to need some time to think about it, to perhaps push yourself to check. Maybe you still won't come up with any new information or new answers, but at least you'll feel like you've given yourself a chance to do that and to think about it properly, rather than just getting into a blind panic where you can't think of anything and your mind goes blank. At this level, and this won't have been true at core or CT1 or CT2, it is starting to become very important to know your field. You may get questions about changes in your field, new technology, new approaches, changes in emphasis, changes in protocols. Have you had a discussion with the ST3s and the consultants in your chosen specialty about what's on the agenda? Hopefully you've been reading the journals, you've been following the bulletins, you've been having those conversations with people and you are aware of things. Generally speaking, nobody's expecting you to know all the final answers about what kind of impact this is going to have. Nobody's going to expect you to know, yes, every single new piece of technology on the horizon, exactly what kind of impact that's going to have on the rest of the specialty. But generally speaking, part of your commitment to specialty should be showing that you're aware of the kind of discussions that are going on in that specialty. If you're asked about something that you have only the haziest of ideas about, what do you think about the new so-and-so and so-and-so? What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on anaesthetics? It's okay to think on your feet, but don't blag. Be honest about the fact that, well, that's what you're doing. Yes, I've come across it in some of my reading. I don't really know what kind of impact it's going to have, and to be honest, I'm not sure anybody else does at the moment. But some of the things that seem quite likely to me are X, Y, and Z. You know, it's okay to show that you've been thinking about these things. What exactly is the level of your awareness? Do you know all about it? Have you read tons of articles, or have you just come across a few mentions of it and it's something that's on your horizon that you could find out more? Or is it something you've not come across at all? Be honest about those things. If you're thinking on your feet, if you are thinking things for the first time and you're trying out new ideas, that's okay, because they want to see that you are somebody who is capable of learning and is capable of being having space for new thoughts and that kind of thing. But again, be honest. Don't blag. You'll be seen through. And lastly, particularly if you're applying for special, in particular small posts in smaller deaneries or in small specialties, you may also get an opportunity to ask your own questions. Why are you applying for this deanery? Those kinds of things. And remember that your questions at the end of the session is also an opportunity for you to find out, A, whether you want this job, what opportunities will I have here, how is so-and-so organised, but also to show how much you want it. Now, the example I'm going to give you for this actually comes from a GP interview. It was somebody in her GP 3 year who had got her first GP job before she finished her training. I asked her if she'd asked any questions at her interview. The question she'd asked was, had a look at the way the place is laid out, and I realised that I'm going to be in this office at the end of a corridor. I'm a little bit worried about that from a security point of view, and also just from the point of view of feeling a little bit isolated. How do you handle that? They gave her an answer both about the security and about how the team worked together that reassured her and made her feel very confident about taking the job. But by asking that question, she'd also told them a lot about how she was thinking and how she saw herself in that role. She demonstrated that she was thinking about things like security, and that would therefore be part of her teamwork approach to the practice, and also that for her, being involved with her team, staying in touch with her colleagues was important. She didn't want to be somebody who was out on a limb. So think about, what are the things you might really want to know about this job? What are the extra opportunities that you're going to be looking out for? How much opportunity will you have to get involved in this particular project, or to learn a particular procedure or a particular type of practice that this department excels in, or these people do? Obviously, you will be rotating around different areas, but again, even different deaneries, different places have different specialties, so you might get a chance to ask those kinds of questions, and again, to demonstrate your commitment of and your knowledge of the area, as well as finding out things that are important for you to know. And if it turns out everything has been answered, again, I think that's rare in a situation like a very structured interview, like for most of the special training interviews, but if they are, say so. I did have a couple of questions about how much time I'd be able to spend on blah, 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 but I think you've actually already answered that, so that's great. Okay, I'm now towards the end of my slides. I hope that's been useful for you. We still don't have any questions coming through on the chat window, so if anybody's got anything, that would be great. If not, never mind. Just to give you some final places to go. Royal College of Physicians has lots of information on St3 Recruitment. The Kent, Surrey and Sussex Deanery links to all the surgery lead recruiters, so you can have a look at all of the surgical specialties and see how much information there is about each of the individual specialties. And I've also given you links to two BMJ articles on applying for ST trauma and orthopaedics and for general surgery there, both of which have got loads of information about how somebody applied, what they prioritised in their applications and their preparation. And then lastly, just I'd like to remind you of some of the other services available from BMA Careers. So we have e-learning modules. Oh, it says F1, F2 on that. Sorry about that. But we do have e-learning modules available through BMA Careers, which you can find on BMJ Learning. So they're BMA Careers modules, but they're hosted on BMJ Learning. As well as soft skills like the BM Careers one. BMJ Learning also has lots of hard skills and clinical topics on there. On there. So if you're not using those already, that's definitely something to look at. And we're also can provide discounts in one-day workshops or half-day workshops. So again, keep an eye on our website for that. And then very lastly, we'd like to draw your attention to some of the social media channels that we've got going now. So we've got BMA Medical Careers on LinkedIn. We've got a BMA Twitter account where we use hashtag BMA Careers for information about careers and what we're doing. And there's a Facebook group, the BMA. So if you're involved, you want to know more about the BMA, more about what's going on with BMA Careers, and you think there's anything else we can do to help you, or you just want to give us some feedback, then please do that. That would be great to hear from you. Thank you very much. That's all for this evening.